3 minutes after 11 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I suppose there were some fears that the wipeout, the electoral wipeout suffered by the Conservative Party might deprive the right-wing newspapers of half-wits to ring up in search of a quote whenever something that they neither understand nor care about appears in the news. Happily, there's one called Greg Smith, me neither, who's told the Daily Mail that Just Stop Oil protesters jailed yesterday are apologists who need to think about the lives harmed and actual losses caused as a result of these actions and get on the side of the British public, not Tarquin and Delilah at Just Stop Oil. And who wouldn't listen to Tory MP Greg Smith instead of Sir David King, the government's former chief scientific advisor, who said yesterday, or in a statement read outside the court, said, "This is so disgraceful. We are all hoping that the change in UK government will also change the situation in our courts." And it is in response to a verdict which has seen 5 protesters, 5 Just Stop Oil activists being handed record terms, the longest ever sentence for a peaceful protest. And I do think that the use of that word peaceful is important, and the response from supporters of Just Stop Oil has been, as you would expect, outraged and deeply upset. So the protests in the evidence, so they've been found guilty of conspiring to cause a public nuisance. So they're kind of being done for planning events that were widely reported at the time, including protesters climbing onto gantries over the motorway for 4 successive days in November 2022. The actual protesters themselves, of course, have already been jailed. 45 activists involved in total, and the economic hit is estimated to be £765,000. The cost of the Metropolitan Police was more than £1.1 million, and the estimated delays, which is quite an interesting conversation given what we just heard from Lowestoft, sort of good delays and bad delays. The Tory government responsible for all sorts of delays as a consequence of its ludicrous Brexit, but Just Stop Oil protesters responsible for an estimated 50,000 hours of vehicle delays, affecting more than 700,000 vehicles. This is the claim. The M25 compromised for more than 120 hours. The problem with the rhetoric of people like Greg Smith MP is that the people who've been jailed are not the types of people to fit the cliches. I don't know how old you are, but I guess it's always tempting to think of Swampy at this point. Swampy was the sort of original eco-activist, or at least the first one to really garner the attention of the British public, because he was attempting to stop road building by digging big tunnels under the targeted area and refusing to come out. In retrospect, that's really brave, especially if you're claustrophobic. But at the time, I mean, I was very much closer to the Daily Mail's position back then than I am now. And at the time, I just thought, not lazy, but troublemaking do-gooders or whatever the phrase at the time was. I think I used to talk about patchouli oil a lot. Do you know what patchouli oil is? I think I used to talk about patchouli oil a lot when we were talking about eco-activists. But people like Swampy were canaries down the coal mine, and they've now been followed by, a 58-year-old woman, Louise Lancaster, a doctor, a PhD, Lucia Whitaker de Abro, Daniel Shaw's 38, Roger Hallam, the co-founder of Just Stop Oil, a 58-year-old man. These are, and a 22-year-old woman called Cressida Gethin. So the 5 names: Roger Hallam, Cressida Gethin, Daniel Shaw, Lucia Whitaker de Abro, and Louise Lancaster. These are people motivated by a profound concern, an irresistible concern, an unignorable concern about climate change. But, and it's 5 years for Roger Hallam, 4 years for the rest of them. Of course, they'll be out in much less than that. Possibly, if the prisons crisis isn't solved, or at least ameliorated sometime soon, they'll be out after serving about 40% of their sentence. But that's not the point. It's a peaceful protest designed to stop the traffic, literally. Figure of speech, that. And here's the thing, all right? I am persuaded, and it shouldn't sound surprising to anybody, but there are still a lot of idiots out there, of course. I am persuaded that the climate change crisis is existential, absolutely extraordinary. And I'm also very conscious of the curious human reaction, which I touched upon at the beginning of the last hour. We hear about this international IT outage, not an internet outage. God, I can't imagine anyone would have called it that. The international IT outage. I called it that. And that was a mistake because, of course, you now use the internet to send the fix to everybody who needs to sort their IT out. So it's an international IT outage. I'm conscious of three things. I'm conscious of intellectually appreciating the scale of the emergency, but emotionally not doing enough. I'm emotionally not doing enough. This isn't about me, by the way. I'm just getting my ducks in a row before I give you the question that I want you to answer. I'm conscious of the fact that we in the media, whether we are broadly sympathetic to Just Stop Oil's cause or not, and if you're not, you really need to give your head a wobble. You don't need to approve of the tactics. We're getting to that. But you really, really, really need to understand the cause, unless, of course, you've been on your Uncle Keith's Facebook page and you're convinced not only that aeroplanes are seeding the planet with secret chemicals, but also that there's no such thing as climate change, and the World Economic Forum is trying to imprison us all in cells made of spam. I get that. So I'm sympathetic to their cause, and I understand the failure to garner the sort of attention that they feel they need. And it is that failure, in which we're all complicit, that prompts the behaviours for which they have now been sentenced. It is the failure of peaceful protest that does not disrupt that propels them into places of disruption. So stuff I find ridiculous, just for the record, is lobbing orange powder on a snooker table at the Crucible in Sheffield. I know it gets coverage, but it will get less coverage. Attacking Stonehenge, I found that ridiculous at 10 o'clock in the morning. By 11 o'clock, I'd kind of come round a bit because of that dichotomy, because of that tension between action and attention. If you really want to draw attention to your cause, you've got to do something that is attention-grabbing. And standing outside the Department of Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs for the rest of your life with a placard, or going even on hunger strike outside the Department of Environment and Rural Affairs, is not going to work. It is not going to get me or other LBC presenters to talk properly about your cause if you do all of the things that you're allowed to do. So instead you do the things that you're not allowed to do. And that includes disrupting traffic. That is what they're going to jail for a total of just shy of 21 years in total. As I say, they won't serve that. But humanity is quite easy to argue. Humanity is currently doomed. And these people disrupted traffic. And they're going to jail for 21 years. So I want you to come at it from that tension there. You know it is easy, and there may well be examples of this happening, but generally speaking, it's a rhetorical device deployed by the intellectually lazy and the morally bankrupt. So you say something like, well, what about all the ambulances that couldn't get through? And then you never mention things like that on days like the coronation, when the entire capital city is brought to a complete standstill, or the late Queen's funeral, where the roads near me were absolutely shut, completely shut. So that the cortege could make its way to Windsor. So, there is some validity in it, but it is deeply disingenuous to pretend that you're not comfortable with shutting down huge swathes of the nation's infrastructure for things like, crownings of kings. You need to do something significant to draw the attention that the emergency demands. But there's still a sense, isn't there, among people who... I tell you what I think this story will have done. I think this story will have got some people who aren't massively sympathetic with Just Stop Oil or their tactics, concluding that the sentence is excessive. The sentence is excessive. And equally, I think you'll have people who are supportive, of Just Stop Oil, who are supportive of both their tactics and their actions, who recognise that the job of the judiciary here is to stop them from doing it again. It is pour encourager les autres. It is literally designed, this sentencing, to stop the next generation or the next phalanx of Just Stop Oil activists from stopping the traffic, from bringing the M25 to a standstill, or sending people up gantries to stop the... what would you call it? To stop the social and economic blood from being pumped around the body politic. That is what they set out to do. And it worked. And that is why the full weight of the law has come down upon them like a ton of bricks. But it's peaceful. There's events in Harehill, just outside Leeds overnight, that are anything but peaceful. It reminds me, if you haven't seen the footage, of when the police van was set on fire outside an asylum centre by racist protesters. A Romanian, I think a Romanian Christian child, they were trying to take into social service care, and the local community reacted incredibly violently to the point of tipping over a police car. Just a message for anyone who needs to hear this: you condemn both. It doesn't matter what the context is, or the identity or the background of the culprits. If people are attacking police vehicles, they are bang out of order. You don't base your reaction to this on whether or not they're football hooligans or I don't know, anti-immigration protesters. They're all scumbags, okay? Whether you're attacking a police car in Leeds because their social services are trying to do their job, or whether you're attacking a police car in Kent because immigration services are trying to do their job. You don't tailor, unless you're a massive racist, of course, and there's a lot of that on social media this morning. But you don't base your response to actions upon the ethnicity or what you perceive to be, or what you're being told by racist agitators the religion of the actors may be. 11:15 is the time. I just want to make that clear. But, you know, there will be people involved in those protests who don't go to jail at all. There are people currently not going to jail. There was one case, and I can't find the detail. I really wanted to set it up for you in juxtaposition to this story, of a man who attacked his girlfriend, threatened to kill her, stabbed her, inflicted terrible, grievous harm upon her, and the judge has said in court that the likelihood of a custodial sentence is diminished by the state of the justice system, by the state of our prisons. So they're releasing violent prisoners early to free up room in a prison system that is now going to contain 5 adults who are going to jail for peacefully protesting against the government's failure to properly address climate change. Now, listen, I know how knee-jerk reactions work. I know, oh, yeah, it's outrageous. They should be locked up for even longer. I get it, but be kinder to yourself this morning. Just be a little bit kinder to yourself. Allow your imagination to grow into a space that is not defined and very tightly controlled by right-wing rhetoric, by lazy, morally bankrupt right-wing rhetoric. Who do I get to kick today? You've ended up asking yourself every morning. Is it the immigrants? No, we're taking a day off from the immigrants. We're going after the eco-zealots or whatever we could. Just be kinder to yourself. Give yourself enough space in your mind to actually wonder what a country is becoming when they are releasing violent criminals early in order to make room for peaceful protesters. And also, I don't know how much attention you paid yesterday to the COVID inquiry, to the original findings of the COVID inquiry, but you will probably have picked up on the fact that the early findings show that had the government been better prepared, goodness knows how many people might still be alive. So what we have today is a situation where a citizen, an ordinary citizen of these islands, who is trying to prevent unnecessary deaths by planning peaceful climate protests, gets sent to prison for 5 years, whereas a former prime minister who literally caused countless unnecessary deaths by transferring resources from pandemic response to preparation for his own lunatic no-deal Brexit, as things stand, gets no punishment at all. So you go to prison for trying to stop people from dying unnecessarily, but you don't go to prison for hurting people. Or, in the case of politicians responsible for our paltry pre-pandemic preparation, contributing to people's deaths. So what do we think? 0345 6060 The tactics, I don't know that they work. I really don't know that people who are a little bit sceptical or ambivalent watch the Just Stop Oil protest and think, yeah, they're right, I'm joining. I don't know. I don't like not knowing. Some days I like not knowing. I like coming on air and admitting to you that I don't know which way to jump. I don't know which way to go. But that's different. That's when there are two directions. I don't know about this story. The job of the government, the job of the judiciary, forgive me, the job of the authorities is to ensure that this stuff doesn't happen. And in order to do that, the sentences need to be really severe. It has to be severe enough to put people off doing the same thing next year. But I don't think that will work. I think it's like breaking a butterfly on a wheel. If you're motivated by existential angst about the future of the species, then you're not going to be put off by 4 years in jail any more than Nelson Mandela was put off the path that he chose to follow by a much longer period of imprisonment. So I don't know. And that's where we go with this question. 0345 6060 What do you think of these sentences? What do you think of them? Will it work? Will it work as a deterrent? Or is it actually quite a dark day for our democracy when peaceful protesters can be sent to prison for longer than violent criminals? The courts correspondent for the Evening Standard tweeted yesterday evening, and I really noticed it. No, it was the first thing this morning, actually, and I really noticed this because I was reading about the jailing of Just Stop Oil protesters for the crime of, wait for it, conspiring to block traffic. I was reading about it at the same time. The courts correspondent for the Evening Standard tweeted, yesterday, a man who threatened to kill a woman, punched and slashed her with a knife repeatedly, got a suspended prison sentence. The judge cited prisons being full and 3 years of court delays as part of the reason for not sending him to jail. This is the last government's legacy in criminal justice. And yet, in the same space, on the same day, 5 people were sent to jail for 5 years and 4 years respectively, for the crime of conspiring to disrupt traffic. And I suppose, if you think that you can, I wonder whether you can make sense of this. Mark's in Romford to kick things off. Mark, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I agree with everything you said. I think it's appalling that these people have been sent to prison.
Just to qualify what it is obviously appalling, but if you move the prioritisation of prevention front and centre, the key role of the authorities here, up to and including the judiciary, is to stop it from happening again, then at least a slim slither of sense perhaps moves into the space, Mark. I don't know, maybe.
Well, the point is, people who are really, really believe in a cause and are really committed to it, there's nothing you can do to them to stop them. They will still carry on. If somebody is truly committed, I mean, history proves that. Look at the suffragettes, look at millions of other causes over the years. If a group of people are truly committed to a cause, they will carry on. Putting a few of their mates in prison for a few years is not going to stop them. If anything, you've now poured petrol on the fire. You've made them even more furious.
And the word martyrdom springs to mind as well.
Yeah, I know. But, at the end of the day, they'll be out in a couple of years, but it's just ridiculous. You just spent the whole of last week, you and every other radio station, talking about how crowded our jails are. Yeah. And then, 2-3 days later, we're sticking 5 people in prison for this. We must be bonkers.
Well, is that a valid compact?
We've got no space in jail.
No, I know. I've made that point. I'm just wondering if is it a valid response to...
No, it's not. This is just balmy. At the end of the day, I was saying to your colleague, the researcher, whoever answered the call, whatever.
Producer.
Once upon a time, 2-3 years ago, I can't remember, they jumped on all the tube trains at Canning Town and that. I was somewhere up the line, got delayed, I got to work late. So what? Okay, it was a minor incident. The company continued, the world's carried on. We all were inconvenienced, but so what? It's not a terrible thing. I know it's so they set out,
how can we garner... massive. Hang on a sec. Let me just say this. I don't think I disagree with you about anything, but I'm trying to sort of see it from their point of view.
Yeah.
And they're saying, how can we secure huge amounts of attention? Well, we have to do something that has an enormous impact. How can we do it without hurting anyone materially? We might cause some economic harm, but we're not going to hurt anybody materially. It's hard to think of a better protest than this, but it is still illegal. So What are they supposed to do? What are the police supposed to do?
You punish them like you punish anybody else. This has just been used. They've made an example of these people. They're trying to use this as a deterrent.
And part of your logic is that it won't work. But equally, you can't let them go out and do it every day and not face sanction because there are plenty of people behind them waiting to take up the mantle. It's a weird one. Thank you, Mark. I like that notion of having been inconvenienced by it, but not thinking that even matters a jot in the greater scheme of things. I mean, I don't know that we'll have time for this, and the phone lines are full already, but does it work? In the sense that are we now more conscious? It's not a question of necessarily being more supportive of the tactics, but are we more conscious of the cause? Do they prompt people to actually look into the science, to tear themselves away from their Uncle Keith's Facebook page and weird Daily Telegraph editorials and Tufton Street shilling, and actually listen to what the scientists have to say and respond accordingly? I just don't know, actually. Mark's in Tamworth. Mark, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I just wanted to bring up the absurdity in parity of offending between what's happened to the protesters and their sentence and what happens to somebody who will knowingly, through an action, i.e. committing a road traffic offence on a motorway. The reason I know this is I was a motorway bobby for years.
I remember. We've spoken about this before.
Yeah.
So you could go out in your car, I'm not saying that you will, James, use your mobile phone, hit the back of another car, cause serious injury to yourself or another person, shut that motorway for several hours while the incident is fully investigated, okay? Yeah. With all the same knock-ons of the closing the motorway for the Just Stop Oil process. Now, the protesters for Just Stop Oil knew what the potential consequences would be of closing the motorway, as does somebody who's using their mobile phone or speeding or drink driving or just not paying attention if they have a collision. So you've got two sets of offenders that are committing offences knowingly, deliberately, knowing the consequences. Your Just Stop Oil protesters go to prison for 5 years. Your person who's driving the motor vehicle can get anywhere between 3 points. And even if they killed somebody and it's deemed to be a death by due care, they might just get a 6 month suspended sentence. The actual economic effects and all the knockback for all those people accused of traffic is just exactly the same. So it's happening every day with
this has really got under your skin, hasn't it?
Well, for years, I was saying these people who commit offences on the motorway through driving when they commit, driving offences on purpose. I suppose
it's not apples with apples, because the person who's using their phone when they're driving or committing another offence and then causes an incident, whether it's fatal or not, that they didn't deliberately set out to do that. So it's not quite like with like, is it? Whereas the protesters,
but they know the consequences. It's like the Just Stop Oil protesters don't deliberately set out to stop somebody getting medical treatment or stop somebody getting to their funeral, or they don't go out to say, right, we're going to cause £750,000 of damage to the local economy. In the same way, but they know the potential consequences of what they're doing. In the same way, the person who's driving the car and commit the offence, they know the potential consequences of what they're doing, because that's why it's against the law. They know the risk involved and everything like that. But for years, I was arguing for the person who commits the driving offence and causes all the knock-on, they should in some way be held accountable for what happens to everybody else. I've been there really in the traffic when they're closed.
That's really, really interesting. So the person who causes a road traffic, we shouldn't really be using the word accident even, should we, in some ways?
No, collision. No,
collision.
Exactly,
they cause a collision.
I've seen
an actual collision which endangers the lives of other people, and you don't get held responsible for the disruption that ensues.
No, and I've closed motorways, registered motorways for collisions, and then what happens is they queue up, and then somebody sitting in the queue has a medical emergency, and the ambulance can't get to them because of congestion, and you're fighting to save their lives in exactly the same way. And it's only happened because somebody else has committed an offence. Now, I'm not saying that the law's the law. We look at it as an ex-bobby. The legislation's there; it has to be adhered to. But the imparity between the two, considering it happens every day, is just farcical. It just seems absolutely bizarre, especially when the prisons are so full. We were arguing for tougher sentences to prevent it happening from the road traffic front every day. But just, for this to start happening now with the Just Stop Oil, protesters, just absolutely just like... ridicule. It's just...
And I mean, this will be probably on the say-so of the individual judge, won't it? the decision, the level of sentencing, and some of the comments that he's made sound a little, close to personal animus. I'm sure they're not, but as you say, with all of those other factors in place, both the context you provide about what happens if people who've committed what are outwardly much more heinous or egregious acts on motorways and caused enormous disruption don't get held responsible for the disruption, and yet he's gone in super hard on this.
Yeah, I do feel sorry for the people that have to deal with legislation. As somebody who had to deal with legislation, I mean, just before I finished on the motorway and retired, I was one of the officers that was trained up to try and get people's faces off motorways if they're superglued them to them, And so you literally, the demand that comes from it is very high, and you start thinking, I've got better things to be doing than this, on a daily basis. I could actually be out there saving lives instead of dealing with this. But you have to work within the legislative framework that you're given, and that's your job. So I do feel sorry for the judiciary, having to, they're basically shoehorned into it by government, aren't they, by the last government?
Well, but that's the problem, isn't it? And Labour voted against that bill, of course, and so that policing bill that introduced the new powers to jail activists like this, as you say, the judge is, in one sense, only working with what has been handed to him, but in another sense, there probably is a case to be answered about the decision that he has made personally, and we'll move on to that later. Mark, what an amazing perspective to come in as a traffic officer, a former traffic officer, and see it in ways that the rest of us would simply not be able to. Thank you. I think this is relevant. You will now see some pressure being brought to bear upon the Attorney-General, I think, to review the sentencing of these 5 Just Stop Oil activists, sentenced to 5 years in one case and 4 years in 4 cases for the heinous crime of conspiring to block traffic. You will see pressure brought to bear on the Attorney-General. And, of course, we know of cases where the original sentence has been deemed to be too lenient or too harsh, and the Attorney-General has intervened to adjust the sentence, in this case the longest for a non-violent protest in living memory. Apropos nothing in particular, I'd like to tell you about a case, a completely different case from earlier this year, in which the original sentence handed down by a judge was indeed revisited by the Solicitor General. And referred to the case, referred to the Court of Appeal for being unduly lenient. It was a case involving a police officer who was handed a suspended sentence. There may be a little bit of a trigger warning here. These involve crimes of a sexual nature. A police officer was handed a suspended sentence for sexual contact with a drunk woman in his patrol car. And the judge at the hearing, it was a particularly unpleasant case involving an officer who later died, and shortly before he died recorded an interview in which he identified the colleague who he had been with when they both had sexual contact with a drunk woman in their patrol car, having stopped to offer her a lift home in Chesterfield years previously, in October of 2015. And during the original suspended sentencing, so the decision not to send this police officer, Matthew Longmate, to jail, the judge in that case said that although his actions amounted to a very grave betrayal of trust and had left the woman humiliated, but he said he did not want to send him to jail in order to, and I quote, bring this sad and sorry tale to its end with a final act of mercy. So a police officer who took advantage of a drunk woman in a police car while on duty was spared jail because the judge in that case did not want, and I quote, to bring this sad and sorry tale to its end, or rather he did want to bring this sad and sorry tale to its end with a final act of mercy. So no jail for Matthew Longmate. When it went back to the appeal court, the description of the Court of Appeal's decision hinged upon claims that the former officer's abuse of his position for sexual gain was sickening. And they decided at the Court of Appeal to jail him for 11 months, saying his extended sentence sends a clear message that there are serious consequences for those who carry out misconduct in a public office. So the judge originally decided not to jail a man, a police officer, for sexual contact with a drunk woman in his patrol car. The case was referred to the Court of Appeal by the Solicitor General, and the original sentence was quashed in April of this year. and Matthew Longwaite was jailed. He's since been dismissed, as you would hope, by Derbyshire Police, but he has since been jailed. And following the Court of Appeal's decision to jail him, the Solicitor General at the time, Robert Courts, KC, said his abusive position for sexual gain was sickening. His extended sentence sends a clear message that there are serious consequences for those who carry out misconduct in public office. Now, why am I telling you about this? Producer's looking at me as if I've taken leave of my senses. Same judge. Same judge. Police officer pulls up alongside a visibly drunk woman in Chesterfield, offers her a lift home and has sexual contact with her. I'm not going to jail him as a final act of mercy to bring this sad and sorry tale to its end with a final act of mercy. 5 people plan protests, peaceful protests designed to stop traffic on the M25. 5 years, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years. Same judge. Just putting it out there. Koye is in Liverpool. Koye, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think as a society, it's getting a bit dangerous for us to just stand back and watch protesters that we might not agree with their tactics, but what they're protesting against might actually be something we all have to draw attention to. So a personal story of mine, my partner, under the hostile environment, my partner was to be deported.
Gosh.
In 2017. We didn't know where she was, no contact. My son is autistic. We had no contact with her for about 3 months. And we just got a call from her on the day she was to be deported from Stansted Airport.
Because she'd been in custody for 3 months?
Yeah, she'd been in custody from 3 months away from our disabled son. And we just don't know what happened. It was like a miracle to us when this group of protesters broke into the Stansted Airport. Obviously, what they were doing, it's quite wrong, we would say, but they stopped that flight. They called the Stansted 15, and
yes, I remember.
That gave us an opportunity to go back to court, and the judge actually ruled that the Home Office was acting unlawfully by attempting to deport my wife. And those 15 young people were prosecuted under the counter-terror legislation.
Wow.
And one judge actually upheld it and said, they should go to jail for terrorism. And they, unfortunately, were able to appeal that case. And the other judge in the upper tribunal, because I followed it all up, I was following them because I was really anxious for them.
I bet you were.
The judge said that there was actually no case to answer, and it was wrong for whether it was the Home Office or someone trying to prosecute them for terrorism.
There's so much going on here, isn't there? It's hard to think of a better example of the necessity of remembering that judgments, laws, and judges are all human. They're not kind of handed down from on high like the tablets to Moses in the Old Testament. So to clarify, if that flight had taken off, your family would be fractured forever.
My family would be separated. I don't know, because in the judgment, the judge said the harm it would do to my son hasn't been considered. Breaking up an autistic child who couldn't speak verbally from his mom. Yeah. Was just so, said it was unduly.
Who was Home Secretary at the time?
Man, my brain was frozen. Theresa May or President after Theresa May, one of them. But I knew it was the hostile environment, all that area, 2017.
She was Prime Minister by then, so it was probably Priti Patel in the Home. But either way, there was such a long list of them, wasn't there? And then when it got to court, when due process was actually followed, it was decided that she was entitled to stay, that she should stay in the country.
Yes.
By a British judge in a British court, for people who like to use phrases like that without really...
Thank the Lord for British judges.
Thank the Lord for British judges. And the protesters, whose actions, although illegal, were entirely responsible for allowing your wife to enjoy the protection of the law, ended up being prosecuted themselves.
Yes.
Which is probably inevitable, because you can't have people wading onto the runway at Stansted for any reasons whatsoever. So I think what you do is you remind us both of the complications in these cases and of the moral dimension that the law is supposed to protect.
Exactly.
Wow.
So it's a tricky mindset, but I think as a British society, it's got a long history of people actually forcing a change on their government, and those changes have been positive, even though the tactics they used are something we might not agree with.
Yeah.
You know, so
I mean, you're right, and peaceful protest, of course, is. I mean, arguably, what you're describing wasn't a peaceful protest. It was a lot more disruptive than just sitting in a road. But there's so many phrases that resonate in today's conversation, and so many stories. But that one, Koye, that one will stay with me for a long time. If it wasn't for the people that the right-wing media routinely encourages us to malign and despise, then a young autistic boy would have been wrenched from his mother in circumstances that a British judge later concluded to be illegal. And Theresa May was supposed to be there. So I've got the features of the evidence relied upon by the judge in this case to impose what he has described as exemplary sentences. In other words, pour discourager les autres. This is massively the deterrent element. That's what, exemplary sentences. And I wonder whether, when I've read it all out in its entirety, whether any minds will change, particularly with Oye's story resonating in our memories. So the evidence that he used to justify the exemplary sentences, or the longest sentences for a peaceful protest in living memory, included people missed flights, people missed funerals, some students were late for their mock exams, a child with special needs on his way to school missed part of the school day and his medication, which placed the taxi driver driving him there at risk, as the child could have become volatile without his medication. Some other school students with special educational needs were also delayed on their way to school. Somebody suffering an aggressive form of cancer missed an appointment at a cancer clinic and had to wait 2 months for a further appointment. People who were late for work had to work extra hours without pay to make up the time. An HGV driver was unable to deliver £5,000 worth of food to a hospital. And then the judge adds, perhaps ironically, given the causes you espouse, an individual invited to answer questions at the House of Lords before the all-party parliamentary group for water was unable to attend the meeting and incurred wasted expenses. So those are the examples given in defence of or support of the decision to jail 5 people for 5 years in one case and 4 in 4 cases. And I think it's important to get that in front of you as well as we continue the conversation about what is and what is not appropriate. But the comparisons, whether it's from a former motorway traffic officer or whether it's from someone whose wife was nearly deported, or whether it's the case of the police officer that the same judge elected not to jail, but the appeal court later decided should be banged up immediately. It's surprisingly nuanced, isn't it? James is in Exeter. James, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Good morning. Yeah, I was imprisoned in 2021 for a year for peaceful protest. And at the time, the judge was clear that he was wanting to make an example of me. So, in other words, creating a deterrent.
Yes.
So my 1 year in Wandsworth was followed then by Marcus and Morgan receiving 2 years, 7 months and 3 months respectively. So now we're looking at 4 and 5 year sentences for for Roger and the others who were imprisoned yesterday. The level of support that I received in prison was phenomenal. I mean, 2,000 items of correspondence in a period of 8 weeks. There was a group of supporters outside the prison every single night. I am not convinced that these sentences serve as the deterrent that they're intended to be.
Talk to me about yourself. I mean, literally. Because has it deterred you from the cause?
Absolutely
You're the chap who climbed onto the plane at City Airport.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So can I tell people who you are?
Yeah, sure.
James Brown, not that one, but the other one. Businessman, and also James, a Paralympian. So again, this idea that you're all sort of late issue swampies or something like that is just ridiculous, isn't it? And that you were jailed for a year. I read a very moving letter, I think, that your cousin wrote, didn't she, to the Guardian newspaper, and the very simple question is, did it put you off? Did it suddenly make you care less about the climate crisis or be determined to deploy different tactics in the future?
it didn't make me care any less. It didn't put me off. Obviously, I don't want to go back to prison again, but I believe there are many, many others in the movement who are inspired and who won't be put off. And I think we've seen, I mean, if you just have to look at it from an evidential point of view, just look at the escalation of the sentences. And
this is the point, isn't it? Is that your sentence was supposed to put off other people, but then, of course, and you were Extinction Rebellion, I think, rather than Just Stop Oil.
Correct.
But the principle is exactly the same. If sentencing you for a year had worked, there would have been no need yesterday to sentence Roger Hallam for 5 years. To which I suppose a reactionary responds by saying, well, 10 years then, or 15 or 20. Eventually, we'll find the sentence that'll make them all stop.
Yeah, exactly. And, my case didn't get a huge amount of publicity, but look at the level of publicity that this case is getting. I mean, it's all over the media. It's getting huge amounts of coverage on phone-ins. Roger's statement, has been viewed, I don't know, over 1.5 million times on Twitter now. It's an awful position that we are in as humanity, and there are so many people who care deeply, and the vast majority of people who wrote to me in prison were just expressing their absolute grief and terror and fear for their children and their grandchildren, and that's where the motivation comes from.
And the feeling that nothing else we've tried works, therefore we will try this. And I mean, if this doesn't work, then you'll have to find something else to do. How did you feel when the judge described you as cynically using your disability to draw attention? That was an interesting phrase. I hope you don't mind me asking, James. I'm just reading. Judge Gregory Perrin said Brown from Exeter, who has been registered blind since birth, cynically used his disability and put his own life at risk when he staged his protest at London City Airport. That, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that speaks of a complete disconnect, because you would use anything to draw attention to this cause because you consider this cause to be so urgent, right? And that's the point that the judiciary misses when it comes up against people like you and indeed like Roger Hallam and his colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to feel about what he said about cynically using my disability. I'm not even sure I know what he meant. But
no,
I mean,
I'm not sure I do either. Well, I suppose it meant perhaps the authorities could have been more robust with you if you weren't blind. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think I was treated the same as anybody would have been.
Strange. One thing you did say is that you don't want to be jailed again. So people listening to this might be thinking, oh, well, it worked then.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of people in this movement. There are plenty of concerned citizens around the world who are taking action. There's only so much one individual can do, and being prepared to give up one's liberty for the sake of the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced. I think that's a sentiment that very many people share.
Can't get past that. The biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced. James, thank you. I'm very, very helpful. As I said before James came on, the number of perspectives that we've managed to explore in this programme has been absolutely breathtaking. And then up pops James, who was one of the first people, I think possibly the first person to be jailed for peaceful protest for climate activism. 1 year, 2021. Massive deterrent, because yesterday they sent someone down for 5 years simply for conspiring to block traffic. I think that's it, actually. I'd squeeze in Lavinia because she's been waiting so long, but you have to do it in a minute, Lavinia. What did you want to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Good morning to you. James, a slightly different angle, really. I just sit here thinking, gosh, the PR and the marketing teams that, represent the oil and gas industry must be laughing on the other side of their faces this morning, because all our focus is on the protest.
Oh, hang on a minute. What if I told you, as a bit of a pet subject of mine, a bit of a hobby horse of mine, what if I told you that one of the secretly funded think tanks that is known to have taken money at some point from fossil fuel companies was actually responsible for helping to draft the legislation that is contained within this policing bill?
Well, there you go.
Hang on, you're supposed to go, no way, that didn't happen, did it?
Yes, well, nothing surprises me anymore.
Well, that surprised me, and I thought I was unsurprisable. I think it was policy exchange, and Rishi Sunak let it slip during a speech there shortly before he ceased to be Prime Minister. But yeah, I mean, the idea that we're talking more about the 5 protesters than we are about the impacts of the fossil fuels is just a sign of the times, a mark of the zeitgeist, and I don't know how to fix it.